In a dimly lit corner of town where the sun was just about to set, an old apartment building named Fujihana-so stood quietly. Its worn-out exterior walls were cracked and the mailboxes rattled. If one looked up, they'd see a faded sign swaying in the breeze. Before that building, a man carrying a ragged backpack stood there, unmoving. His name was Tsubasa Yoshida, 27 years old, currently a temp worker. Starting today, he was going to live in this old apartment. "Guess I've really hit rock bottom," he muttered with a bitter smile, clenching his hand in his pocket. He sighed at the reality that he had no choice but to live here. Once upon a time, Tsubasa was called Kishin no Yoshida. He was the strongest delinquent in the area, never losing a single fight. But the world wasn't so lenient that he could live off that old glory forever. After high school, he decided, I'm gonna be straight-laced and got a job. However, his short fuse caused constant run-ins with his bosses. He switched jobs repeatedly, and now he was just a temp worker. Stability nowhere in sight. Well, I'll just start over from here, he told himself, taking a deep breath. He grabbed the rough wooden railing and stepped into the entrance. At that very moment,
"Hey, what do you think you're doing?"
a sharp voice echoed. Tsubasa froze in place. It was low and cold, but somehow familiar. Turning around, he saw a woman in a tracksuit, arms folded, glaring at him.
Suzuki?
He almost couldn't believe it. Decked out in a black tracksuit, slender yet fierce-eyed, she had a commanding presence that was impossible to ignore. Her name was Yuma Suzuki. Back in high school, she was a female bancho, known as one of the local 4 emperors, and Tsubasa's greatest rival. She and Tsubasa had gone toe-to-toe many times. No matter how brutally they fought, neither could claim a decisive victory, and one day they ended up laughing together, both covered in bruises.
"It's you?"
Why the hell are you here?
"I should be asking you that. Never thought you'd end up living here."
Yuma sighed and gestured toward the apartment's nameplate. It read, Manager, Yuma Suzuki.
As manager?
"Yep, and you're the new tenant, right?"
When Tsubasa nodded, Yuma sneered.
"Heh, look how far you've fallen, Kishin no Yoshida."
Tsubasa clenched his teeth. Back in high school, he would have snapped right back, but now he knew it was true.
That's got nothing to do with anything now.
"Oh yeah? I doubt you can ever be normal. I know you better than that."
Her eyes had a razor-sharp glint, as though she could see straight through him. It looked like this new life at the apartment was off to a tumultuous start. A cold wind swept through as Tsubasa tried to stay calm under Yuma's gaze. Inside, though, he felt a restless unease.
Can't be normal, huh? I'm just a temp worker now.
"All right, sure, do what you want, but..."
She jerked her chin at the back of the apartment.
"I manage this place. The rules are absolute. Don't go acting out like the old days."
I'm not gonna do anything crazy.
"Then fine. Now hurry up and get your stuff to your room."
Irritated by her attitude, Tsubasa readjusted his luggage and headed to the room she pointed out. The hallway was dim, lined with tenants' mailboxes on the wall. When he turned the key and opened the door, he found an old tatami floor and a cramped one-room layout. It was a simple space with no bed, just a folding table and chair, and the only appliances were a tiny fridge and a microwave.
Man, I've really hit bottom.
Tsubasa let out a dry laugh and placed his luggage on the floor. He was about to take off his shirt when he heard a flat knock at the door.
"Hey, new guy.
What now?
Come here a second."
With that, Yuma vanished down the hall. Wondering what she wanted, Tsubasa hurriedly put his shirt back on and opened the door. She stood by a bulletin board near the front entrance, arms crossed, waiting.
"Take a look."
She nodded toward the board where a sheet labeled House Rules was posted. Fujihana-so, resident rules. 1. No noise after 10 p.m. 2. Keep shared areas clean. 3. Cause any trouble, and you're out. Only that third rule was underlined heavily in red.
"If you cause problems here, I'll kick you out on the spot. Got it?"
What do you think I am anyway?
"I know exactly who you were when you were Kishin no Yoshida."
Her gaze was so sharp it was like she was trying to drag out his past.
I'm not that guy anymore. I'm just living a normal life.
"Then prove it."
With that, she turned her back and walked off toward the manager's room. Tsubasa watched her go for a moment. Back in his room, Tsubasa stared at the ceiling. The fact that Yuma knew about his past bothered him more than he expected. Kishin no Yoshida is done for good. He thought so, but Yuma's words kept echoing in his head as he lay on the cramped tatami. Her glare, that cold tone, somehow it kept nagging at him. The next morning, Tsubasa was jolted awake by his little alarm clock. Sleeping on the tatami left his back aching.
I forgot how hard these mats can be.
Scratching his head as he got up, he heard loud voices beyond the door.
Hey, what are you doing? Who the hell are you?
Frowning, he stepped out into the hallway. Near the front entrance, some tenants had formed a circle around someone. Standing at the entrance was a man Tsubasa recognized. His sharp-eyed stare gave him away. Ryuto, an old delinquent buddy, now running jobs for some shady people.
Yo, Kishin no Yoshida. Though I hear you're just a temp worker now?
Tsubasa's expression hardened. This was trouble.
What do you want?
Just passing by. Heard you were living in this dump, so I figured I'd drop in for old time's sake.
If you're not a tenant, get lost.
Yuma stepped out of the manager's room, arms folded, glaring at Ryuto. He grinned.
So the manager's a woman here, huh? You used to be pretty famous around these parts too. Suzuki, madam.
Who the hell you calling madam? Get out.
Her tone was icy, but her eyes were cautious. She clearly sensed something dangerous in a guy like Ryuto showing up unannounced.
Ryuto, if you've got no business here, then leave.
Don't be so cold. You're still Kishin, aren't you?
That word made Tsubasa's fist tighten involuntarily. The other tenants stirred uneasily. All eyes fell on Tsubasa. They had no idea what was going on, but they were clearly curious.
That's all in the past.
Is it? Doesn't sit right, you wasting away as a temp. Boring if you ask me.
Ryuto shrugged dramatically and glanced at Yuma.
Hey manager, this place has a no violence or you're out rule, right?
That's correct.
Yuma's eyes shifted to Tsubasa as if to ask, "You're not gonna go wild like before, right?"
Don't worry. No matter what Ryuto says, I'm not fighting.
Heh, well if that's how it is, fine. But hey.
Ryuto fished a small note from his pocket and pressed it against Tsubasa's chest.
If you ever get in a jam, give me a call. A guy like you belongs in our world.
With that parting shot, Ryuto left the apartment. Silence fell in the entryway. Tsubasa crushed the paper in his fist.
This is the worst.
Yeah.
For a while, Tsubasa and Yuma stood there in silence. The other tenants drifted off, looking uncomfortable.
You really think you can live a normal life?
I do.
All right then.
Yuma let out a deep sigh and returned to the manager's room. Tsubasa, fists still clenched, watched her go. Nighttime at Fujihana-so was quiet. Distant car engines hummed, and the wind rustled the trees. Tsubasa sat on his bed, hands still balled into fists, thinking hard. Yuma's words from that morning replayed in his mind. You sure you can really live normally? He exhaled slowly. It was a question he'd already asked himself so many times. Just then, footsteps echoed heavily. Someone was banging on the front door, the thuds sounding rough.
Hey, Kishin no Yoshida, we ain't done talking.
Tsubasa grimaced, standing up slowly. But in the next moment, he heard Yuma's voice from farther down the hallway.
You're getting on my nerves.
Tsubasa's brow twitched. Opening his door, he saw Yuma and Ryuto facing off near the manager's room.
Huh, you're awful cocky. Still got guts, Suzuki, madam.
Ryuto sneered and stepped closer to Yuma.
Knock off the stupid intimidation. Get out now.
Oh, don't be so hasty. I'm just here to give some advice from a friendly face.
Ryuto's voice was low, yet oddly amused. Yuma's expression tightened.
So you run this dump of an apartment, huh? Ain't it lonely?
None of your business.
Nah, it is. You always like to act tough, but deep down you're fragile.
At those words, Yuma's body stiffened for just a moment. Ryuto didn't miss that and grinned wider.
Don't tell me you forgot about that money.
Yuma went silent, like the air had been sucked out of her. Tsubasa noticed her expression change.
Back in the day, you got screwed by those so-called friends of yours, didn't you? Left you with a massive debt.
Her fingers trembled slightly.
If I recall, you funded some business they pitched. They said, "It'll definitely make bank." And you believed them.
Yuma sucked in a sharp breath.
And in the end, they ran off with everything, leaving you stuck with the debt. Worse yet, they spread rumors that you were the one who conned them.
Her eyes flickered, like she was being forced to confront memories she'd rather forget.
Then you couldn't turn to your family, and ended up in a place like this. Tragic, really.
Her fists shook, her eyes downcast, teeth clenched. For the first time, Tsubasa saw the ever-confident Yuma looking so fragile, like she was about to be crushed.
That's enough.
He stepped in front of Yuma, glaring at Ryuto.
What, you gonna save her?
Tsubasa gently pushed Yuma behind him and faced Ryuto directly. Then Tsubasa bowed his head deeply.
Please, just leave us alone.
Ryuto looked surprised for a moment, but then let out a bored snort.
Lame.
Shoving his hands in his pockets, he averted his gaze.
You're like a dog with its fangs pulled. I'm done. Got no interest in you.
Ryuto turned on his heel and stalked off down the hallway, vanishing into the night. Silence fell again. Tsubasa remained where he was. Yuma stood there with her head down, saying nothing.
Let's go back inside.
After a brief pause, she nodded softly. Tsubasa followed her into the manager's room. It was quiet inside, the air feeling cold. He headed to the kitchen without a word and picked up the kettle.
What are you doing?
Figured you might want some tea.
She stared at him in surprise for a second, then quickly turned away.
Fine, I'll take some.
He boiled water and readied a cup for her. A short while later, they sat at the table, facing each other. Yuma wrapped her hands around the cup, staring at the steam as she spoke quietly.
I trusted them.
You mean that underclassman of yours?
Yuma nodded.
He always looked up to me, followed me around like it was natural, but
Her fingers trembled slightly.
I never thought he'd betray me.
So he tricked you.
She bit her lip.
He was a friend. We were always together. I thought he knew me better than anyone, but
Her voice shook a little.
next thing I knew, everyone was saying, "It's all Yuma's fault. They stuck me with the debt too."
Tsubasa watched her trace the rim of her cup, sensing how deeply she'd been hurt.
At first I was mad, but no one listened to a word I said. No, maybe they chose not to listen.
She lowered her eyes.
I was always acting tough. No matter how much it hurt, I pretended it was nothing.
She let out a small laugh, but it was tinged with sadness.
So that's why you felt you had to stay the strong one.
Yuma stayed silent for a moment before finally nodding.
I was afraid that if I showed weakness, everyone would leave me.
But now?
Still gazing at her cup, she let a slight smile show at the corners of her mouth.
Who knows?
Tsubasa quietly sipped his tea, waiting for her to continue. She exhaled slowly, lifted her cup again, and mumbled.
Thanks for stepping in back there.
Tsubasa's eyes widened a bit. It was rare for Yuma to voice her gratitude so openly.
That's what I'm here for.
She let out a faint laugh.
You're a weird one.
In the stillness of the night, Tsubasa felt the distance between them grow a bit smaller. A few days later, a chilly wind blew through Fujihana-so. Tsubasa stood quietly under the night sky, a can of coffee in hand. Since that incident, nothing big had happened with Yuma, but something felt different. She kept up her usual tough front, yet there were moments when she seemed like she had something else to say. And Tsubasa realized he was thinking about her more and more. Just then, the door to the manager's room opened quietly.
Aren't you cold?
Yeah, kinda. But the night breeze feels nice.
Yuma walked up beside him and silently looked up at the sky.
Hey,
Let's head up to the roof.
Tsubasa gave her a surprised look.
Right now?
Just come on.
With that, she started up the stairs. He smiled slightly and followed her. They emerged onto the rooftop, greeted by a soothing breeze. Yuma leaned against the railing, lazily watching the city lights. Tsubasa stood next to her, quietly lining up by her side.
I like it up here.
Yeah? Why's that?
I come here a lot when I've got stuff on my mind.
Her face was calm, though with a subtle hint of loneliness. As he looked at her, Tsubasa felt something swell inside him. He just wanted to protect her, That was all.
You asked me once if I was happy, right?
Yeah.
Well, how about now?
She kept her eyes on the night sky for a moment, silent.
I don't know.
Yuma shrugged lightly, letting out a wry chuckle. Tsubasa watched her, then spoke quietly.
If you can't say you're happy yet, I'll stay by your side until you can.
Her eyes widened sharply.
Huh?
Just figured I'd stick around so you won't need to act tough anymore.
Yuma caught her breath, staring at Tsubasa. After a pause, she looked down and murmured.
You're such an idiot.
Her cheeks faintly tinged pink. She glanced up at the sky, like she was trying to hide her embarrassment.
Well, maybe that's not so bad.
Tsubasa gave a quiet smile in response. As the night breeze brushed by, the distance between them grew just a bit closer. That was how Tsubasa and Yuma's relationship shifted from just a tenant and a manager to something special. Under the warm spring sunshine at Fujihana-so, a few months had passed since that night, and the trust between them only grew. During that time, an unexpected turning point arrived for the apartment. One day, a major TV network featured Fujihana-so as a hidden retro gem from the Showa era. Retro yet super livable, cheap rent, and a great vibe. The praise spread quickly, and right after filming, inquiries flooded in. Vacant rooms were snatched up in no time, and rental income stabilized almost overnight. Yuma showed skill as a manager while Tsubasa backed her up, and the apartment business got on track. It also meant she could finally see an end to her debt. And now they stood together on the same rooftop, gazing at the sky. No longer just manager and tenant, but as special partners who supported each other. Yuma shot Tsubasa a sidelong glance and muttered.
Are you planning to stay here forever?
Tsubasa gave a small laugh and patted her hand lightly.
Nah, maybe it's about time we found a place of our own.
She looked surprised, then quickly glanced away with a slight smile. Their story wasn't over yet, but the future they would walk together had become certain and unshakable.